Well, while people trickle in, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're delighted to have such a great turnout to help us welcome Annalena Baerbock here to Washington. In case we haven't met, I'm Karen Donfried, and I have the great privilege of running the German Marshal Fund of the United States. And as you will know, our mission is strengthening transatlantic cooperation in the spirit of the Marshall Plan. And there are lots of ways we do it. And one of the most fun ways is by having guests from Europe to help us here in Washington understand what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic. And we are delighted to have all of you in this room. This is also being live streamed. So I'm just going to say hi to our Facebook audience. We are delighted to have folks joining us that way as well. This is an on-the-record session. And I want to note that this session we are doing in cooperation with longstanding wonderful partners of ours, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And I'm so delighted to have Bastian Hermeson here. And let me just thank you, Bastian, for the great cooperation. And the star of the show today is Annalena Baerbock, and you have read her bio. She is the chairwoman of the German Green Party. She is a member of the German Parliament, the Bundestag. She has a very interesting background, which I hope you've all read about. I'm not going to tell you about her many distinctions. I'm going to mention just two things. One is she was part of the team that worked on negotiating a possible so-called Jamaica coalition last fall after the German election. There was an attempt, as you'll remember, to have a CDU-CSU government with the Greens and the Free Democrats. Didn't work out, but I thought that was sort of an interesting fact. And the second thing is, for me, the most important part of your biography, which is she is an alumna of the Marshall Memorial Fellowship, which is GMF's flagship fellowship program. So she traveled through the US with GMF, and she is a living example of what an amazing job our selection committees do. So we're so happy to have you here for that reason too. And basically, the run of show is we're going to have a conversation. And then, by about 1:15, I'm going to turn it over to all of you. So as we're talking, I hope that sparks questions on your part, or you may have come with questions. But we're going to try to start off by elucidating some of the interesting aspects of the German and the European political landscape. And just to kick off, you are a member of the Bundestag from Brandenburg. And I think when a lot of us Americans look to Germany today, we see a Germany that's been united for decades. But there are times when we think that there actually is still an East-West division in the country. And I'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having this discussion round here tonight. Thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to be back here. The good thing is that I can always remember very well when I was here with the German Marshall Fund program, because I was pregnant in the 30th week, so I exactly know when it was, 7 years ago. And at those days, really, it was a remarkable thing for me, because we traveled with a European group, and you could really strengthen not only transatlantic relations, but also the European dimension of this group. And especially in those days, I'm thinking often back to this journey throughout the country, because some of the things which we are debating now those days, because you always go to very interesting and small towns at the journey, you could maybe see and feel already 7 years ago. And there's also like a strong relation to what is happening now in Germany. And coming back to the question you were asking about the divide in Germany between East and West. I'm deeply convinced that the worst thing we can do is to give single answers to the relationship between the US and Europe, and also to the things which have happened in our society. And yes, there is a division still in Germany between East and West, but there's even a deeper division between big cities, rural areas, and non-rural rural areas. And this is deeper and more alarming than a division between East and West. And because we have talked so much about East and West and didn't talk so much about the question of people living really outside from social infrastructure, living in places where like railway stations were shut down, where nurses were being shut down, where there isn't a shop anymore, which has happened all after the fall of the Berlin Wall. These are more reasons for having some of the phenomenons we are having now than actually that it's East and West, because Leipzig or Potsdam, where I'm living, they're totally familiar to other places in Germany like Bayreuth or somewhere else. And also when you look at the results of our right extreme party now, the new AfD, you have to look, actually, they have peaks in areas where we don't have like constant internet connection. They have peaks in areas where they shut down the railroad station in Eastern Germany, but also Northern or Western or Southern Germany. And I think it's more important to look at these things. However, because it's not a single reason, we also did something completely wrong after '89 that we thought democracy will come by itself, because people went on the streets for democracy, and then we turn on the light and democracy is there. And we see it also in Eastern Europe. They joined the European Union, everybody was saying, well, great, now they joined the club of the values of the EU, rule of law, democracy, freedom of press, all these kind of things. But that democracy is a thing you have to work for every day, everywhere in society. We forgot, and we also forgot in the western part of the European Union. And this is also one part of the reason. There are many, many others. Maybe we come back to them later. But I see also there are some similarities between Europe and the US in these kind of questions.
So I was told that you spent part of the summer sort of making a tour through Germany. And I'm curious, I mean, did you notice differences of perspective in that tour? Or would you say that across the country, if you were to say, you know, what are the three priorities that are on your mind as a German citizen? Was there a unity of perspective across the country?
Actually, we did our tour under a new topic, and this was a bit new because I've been elected for a party leader for the Green Party for 6 months now. We always have a double head, so a man and a woman. This is kind of our credo as a Green Party. I think it works quite well. And the headline for our tour was, this is now difficult with translation, is from our national anthem, which says, well, somebody has to translate, Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit sind des Glückes Unterpfand. So unanimity, the rule of law and freedom are the base for everybody's, or the foundation for everybody's, or happiness is a bit wrong, joy in life, yeah, or joyful life kind of things. So the first thing was that, oh my God, the Greens, we are considered as a center-left party, a progressive party. They are using the anthem. Should they do it? But in times where actually we also have a debate about all these three values, meaning unanimity, who belongs to our society? Is it just the German-born people, or are these people also who came to Germany and live there and also citizens? The question about rule of law. Are there situations where you can like bend the rule of law a bit because it's way easier to do it? And also the question of freedom. Are we fighting for freedom every day, or do we have to change our view on this? In these times, we are thinking that it's very good to go to different places where these values are being challenged and to fight for them, to kind of reclaim them from the extreme right in Germany, who's now saying we are defining who belongs to Germany. So it was a bit controversial, especially under progressive people, but it was also very successful because we started to come in discussion with people which normally didn't come to our discussion rounds. And asking now, so what are the common grounds within Germany, or the most important things we have to talk about? First one is, for me, we have to come out of our own bubble. Also, with like me as a politician, yeah, I have 2 daughters. I just entered parliament 5 years ago. I struggle with children care every day when they are sick because my parents are not living in the same town as I do. Like normal people's problems. However, when I come to a place, it's like always, yeah, you as politicians, you don't know what life is going on. And then I don't start talking about politics. I start talking about my kids. And then people say, okay, you understand what our life is about. And I'm saying, yeah, why not? But the distance between politicians, and even I'm not 20 years in politics, but still, when you say I'm a member of parliament, it's kind of, okay, you're somewhere out there. And this is, for me, the most important thing. And it's everywhere the same in Germany, that people are saying, you're the first politician I've ever met in my life. And I think this is really a problem. If we should represent people, it's not our job to go only through like representations or unions or like big movements. We have to go to ordinary people. The second point, which is really important for us, is at the moment where some of our fundamental rights are challenged or are being challenged, that we have to be clear on our values. I don't make a discussion about whether the rule of law is something we have to defend every time or just on Sundays. This is the basic foundation of our constitution. So my job is, as a politician, but also as a citizen, to defend democracy and the rule of law every day, even though in stormy weathers. And I think this is very important those days, that you make pretty clear when these fundamental values are being challenged, that you make clear on which side you're on. And we had a big debate in early spring about the question whether we should bring back like internal borders within Europe, again, because of the whole refugee crisis. In Austria, they had discussion, and unfortunately also by our own interior minister in Germany. And for me, I was born in 1980. The European integration is like my normal life. And talking about bringing back borders within Germany touches on our fundamental values of the European Union. And in these kind of times, it doesn't help of saying, yeah, maybe sometimes we have to do this or not. But bring it down to, it's a fundamental question. Do we want to go back to national politics, or do we defend the European integration project? And the European integration project is based on the free movement of people within Europe, because otherwise you just have the free movement of goods and finance and market, which is a big danger, and brings me to my third point, that the question of social justice hasn't been on the agenda as it should be within the last 10 years within Europe, but also within Germany. And this was also the reason why the AfD in Germany got so much power again. They were founded not as an anti-migration party, because this was actually not one of the major things in Germany. It was founded as an anti-Euro party in the financial crisis, because at those days they realized, the populists on the right side, that politics didn't give enough answers to the challenges of globalization, digitalization, and the free movement of capital around the world. And this was their source. And this was also the biggest problem, that progressive parties didn't give an answer to these. And people had the feeling that in a globalized world, you have to pay your taxes. And as Europeans, we are very proud to pay taxes because we have a strong social security system. But I totally understand that a person saying, I have a bookstore around the corner, why do I have to pay like 25% of my whole income as taxes? And then Amazon, who is also selling books all over Europe, doesn't have to pay it. And politics didn't give an answer to this. And this was kind of the source for the populists. And then they moved it over because there wasn't an erection in political debate about social question. And then the migration topic came up, and they kind of had a second spring because they found a new topic. But the question of social security and social inequality, this has to be the main focus and answer when we talk about right-wing extremism, and not so much what we can do in migration policy. We also have to have a plan there, but this is not the major focus I think we have to look on. And if you go all over Germany, if you pin it down in the end, actually it's everywhere the same, because people want to live their life happily, and they want to live in a secure place in their local town, saying, okay, I have everything I need here, and then I'm also open and free to live in a globalized world if I know that I have a safe haven where I can always come back to.
So you touched on a lot of really important points there, and one topic that has been getting a lot of press in this country from Germany has been Chemnitz. And you know, you have a German citizen who's killed by migrants, and it triggers a whole set of protests from the far right, but also then counter protests. And I know that you have been at one of the counter protests, and in many ways it encapsulates many of the topics we've touched on. Is there an East-West divide? The rise of the AfD? Where is far right populism in Germany? Help us understand Chemnitz. How do you see it? I mean, it probably gets back to the issues you just talked about. Is it more of an East German phenomenon? What's the right way to respond to that?
Well, we do have a problem with right-wing extremism in Eastern Germany, especially in Saxony, where Chemnitz is based on. We know that for the last years, but actually we know that for the last 50 years. And unfortunately, the local government there didn't really react to it, like also after the 1990s. And this is different. So you cannot put whole Eastern Germany over the same, how do you say, umbrella, yeah. Because, for example, where I'm from, Brandenburg, in the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we had also this upcoming neo-fascist movements, especially in Eastern Germany. Like, people were being killed, similar situation, by extreme right-wing people because they burned their houses. And in those days, there was a big alliance of all citizens all over Europe, Germany, like millions of people demonstrating in the streets. And then a lot of Eastern German governments said, okay, we need a strong coalition of all Democrats against these peoples and show this is not the way we want to do it, and strengthening civil society, doing educational work, all these kind of things. But this didn't happen in Saxony because of political decision by their government at those times. So this is one source that it has in history, that a lot of things, Chemnitz has, like other towns before, like weeks before, we had like also attacks from right-wing extremism. So it's no coincidence that it happened in Chemnitz, like the showing off of forces of extreme right and misusing such a horrible murder as an occasion for this demonstration. However, if you look at the people who were in the streets, they didn't come all from Chemnitz, not even part of it. They came from all over Germany. And this is important because there's a strong network, and it's a European network of the extreme right, which is supported also with a lot of money directly from Russia. We also have to see this connection there, and they are testing different spots where they can claim the streets. And the horrible thing which happened was, yes, also this demonstration, but afterwards that the police in the first side wasn't able to control the street. And this gave a picture that the state doesn't have the control anymore. The same story what the extreme right is always telling. The state is losing control, they say, because of migration. But here we had a situation where the state for a couple of hours was losing control. And that's why, for me, it is a turning point, even though we had these kind of demonstrations before. For me, two things are important, and also because we're here a bit further away from Germany. It's not the same as the situation here. It's horrible what happened in Chemnitz. It's a total alarm signal for us, because afterwards also we had really problems with the intelligence service, the president of this intelligence service. There are many things which are not going right. However, we have a clear majority of more than 80% within society, also within the parliament. The AfD entered parliament with 12%. And we shouldn't play their game of saying now Germany is split and here's the extreme right and here is the rest. This is not true. And this is, I believe, really the danger which happened also in public media within the last 1.5 years. We had television shows and then was like always split, but this doesn't reflect society movement. And I think this is very important. Also, when we want to give answers and say, okay, we want to win voters from the AfD, I believe it's very important not to say focus on the 12%, because some of them, they are extreme right, fascist, whatsoever. They want to challenge the democracy. I will never win as a Green party share these kind of people. Maybe some of them. Yeah, it's not say don't talk to them at all. But we have to rather look at the 40% in Germany, like on federal election, who are not going to vote for different reasons. Some are saying everything is fine, I don't have to vote, they do it well. Others are saying the democratic parties, there's no difference. I don't care who I'm voting because they are all the same. Others are totally frustrated for some of the social reasons I was mentioning. And I think the very important thing is to focus on them. Why don't they take part in politics, in civil engagement? And if you go down to local election, and then you have a split again between East and West, like participation in local election in Eastern Germany is extremely low, sometimes like only 30%. And I think this is more where we have to focus on Democrats, how to engage people again in election. It doesn't just mean go to vote, but also in daily participation within your communities, within the civil society, strengthening those parties. And this is really the job, what we have to do as democratic parties, in my point of view.
Your point that, don't misunderstand what's happening in Germany. I mean, 80% of the public is still firmly in the liberal democratic camp. And, we also see another grand coalition government at national level. And so I think the other side of this is people could look at Germany and say, well, actually, nothing's really changing. But if you look at the political party landscape, Germany does look very different, even than it did 5 years ago at the last election. I mean, the former Grand Coalition had about 80% of the seats in the Bundestag, and now they have a pretty slim majority in the Bundestag. And so, if you take Bavaria, an election in the state of Bavaria next month, I mean, it's really striking to see how badly the CSU is doing, how badly the SPD is doing, and there's a broader crisis of social democracy across Europe. The Greens are looking good. I mean, you're the second largest party right now in Bavaria. And so I'd be interested in how you are trying to position the Greens. I think a lot of Americans still think of the Greens of the 80s, environmentalist, pacifist, anti-establishment. But are you really becoming more a party of the center? Do you see yourselves as eclipsing the Social Democrats as the party of the center left? Just tell us how you see the Greens fitting into this political constellation today.
For me, time have changed so dramatically that some of the answers from 10 or 20 years ago, especially if you put the coordination system, here's the right and here's the left, and you just put the parties in between somewhere, doesn't work like it anymore. Because if you take, for example, the question of further European integration, for me, I would say working together in Europe and giving also up some competences to the European level, this is more like a left answer. But if you could look in reality, our left party, which followed the Communist Party, is most of the part anti-European and takes the same argumentation sometimes as the right parties. And then we have the liberals at the moment who weren't in government, in parliament for the last years, and they are not decided at all. And we don't see that only in Germany. We also see that in other European countries, for example, the Netherlands, that the liberals, which used to be in the past very pro-Europeans, turn to be anti-Europeans. So for me, the whole system of being right or left, it's not so easy anymore to position you there. And I think it's also kind of the wrong debate. For me, it's more in this regard, are we going back to national answers and solution in a globalized world, or are we working on European and also multilateral answers? And the same on the question of liberal values. We have a shift between countries which are turning more to a like authoritarian answer, and those who are saying we are defending a liberal, open, free society based on a plural system and society. And this is kind of what we as a new party leaders try to do, saying we are giving answers to the questions which are on the table right now, and these are clearly European. These are truly liberal, like from liberal meaning from a civil rights movement base. And it's also, and they're like coming to the ecological questions. I would say we even have to be more radical on ecological answers, because if you look at the climate crisis, it's kind of the biggest danger worldwide to mankind. And we have to really give answers to this. And like the social democrat answer currently in Germany is, yeah, but let's take like, don't take too much pass on this because otherwise we have social problem. And this is, in my point of view, the total wrong answer. And they would consider them also a bit more to the left. But I think like counterparting ecological question and social questions, it's totally wrong, because if you look in cities, or I think you know it like in America very well as well, those people who have the less incomes, they suffer mostly from environment polluted area, meaning water, but also meaning the climate crisis worldwide. I mean, who has to flee because of a climate crisis? Those people who then cannot feed themselves anymore. And it's the same in Germany. We had like horrible rainfalls and also first time tornado like 2 years ago in Germany. Yeah, and some insurance companies say, we don't insure your houses anymore. And who's suffering? Those people who cannot afford to build a new house afterwards. So for me, this is also a very important point if we are talking about where to set your party in the coordination system, that I'm saying social justice and ecological answers, they totally belong together. And that's what we as green people are standing for, and bringing up the social question a bit more on the agenda, where in the past, at least in Germany, people didn't really connect for the Green Party of a party for social justice.
And, you know, the debate you sketched around what's the right answer to these issues. Is it a nationalist answer? Is it, or do we want an open society? I mean, that's also a debate that you're seeing very clearly on the European stage. And I know that you worked for a member of the European Parliament, and there's also been a lot of attention focused on the European Parliament elections that'll be coming next May. And in the last round of European Parliament elections, you had a parliament result with about 30% of those members who are Eurosceptical. It seems so hard to imagine that you run to be a member of the European Parliament for the express purpose of trying to undermine European integration. But the concern is that next year you'll have an even larger cohort of Eurosceptics in the European Parliament. So for Germany, and I think you'd find a very, very strong majority of Germans who want a European answer to these challenges. What do you see coming out of those European Parliament elections next year?
Well, I believe these are the most important European elections since 1979, when the European Parliament was for the first time being elected directly by its citizens, because it's really a question if Europe is going further the way of integration and giving answers together to global question, or if we are going back to national answers. So this is really a crucial debate. And for me, the thing is that those parties in the past who said we are pro-Europeans, they didn't dare to really defend the European project. And we can see that in many, many countries. Also, for example, with regard to the Brexit. The whole reason why we are having the Brexit was actually that before the vote on it, 3 years before, Cameron connected his own political career to the question of the result of the Brexit. It actually didn't have anything to do with the future of the European Union, but he was challenged so much by UKIP those days, from a right-wing party again. He didn't have the courage of saying, yes, we are having problems in the European Union, and I mean, the Brits were always a bit skeptical, but anyhow, this is a project which I defend as a Democrat. But he was saying, well, I don't really know. I don't want to position, because he was so much afraid of UKIP that he said, like, in 3 years' time, when like time has already different questions on its agenda, we will have a people's vote on it. And it was a question of courage. And I really believe that some of the problems we are having in the European Union is due to the lack of political leadership to really do what leadership means, to lead, to give people an answer, a vision, a hope for the future, and also solution, and not just say, okay, we are in this situation and we don't really know what to do. We just have to arrange ourselves with this situation, but instead of giving really solutions for a project. And that's where we can learn from also from Macron. He was in a similar situation, in the situation that he was challenged highly by the extreme right. And the difference was that he, other than the other Democratic Party, said, okay, I take a clear stand on a pro-European narrative. And I also have a vision of what to do with this European Union. And I think this is so important with regard to the European election, that if we want to save this European model, which is like the guarantee for peace in Europe, and we should never forget about this, then we have to be ready for changes of European politics. And this is also, okay, I'm opposition party, but however, my what I blame the current government for, the Great Coalition, that they were for the last 10 years only looking of stabilizing the current situation. But in a world where you have globalization, where you have digitalization, I mean, you cannot stabilize things. Digitalization is like a revolution, like for work, for life, for media. So you have to give as politics answers and also regulation, how to deal with these kind of new situation. And the European leaders, they have unfortunately failed badly in this field of giving political answers for new challenges. And this is really the job for the future European Parliament, and especially for governments, of saying, so how do we want to manage, what is the gestalten, shape a globalized world with the values. My values are democratic-wise, that you have democratic decisions in a globalized world, and that it's not just big business and big money, and also in an ecological and in a social just ways. And different political parties would give different answers, because the liberal says, well, we want a bit less regulation. But starting on, yes, we have to regulate these kind of phenomena is, I think, the biggest thing to do for the upcoming months.
So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Germany's female chancellor is not Angela Merkel. We have Chancellor Baerbock, who right now is sitting there in Berlin. Call for leadership at EU level. Macron is trying to give it, and he's been waiting for a German partner. So, Kanzlerin Baerbock, what is the most important thing that Germany and France should be doing together today? What should Germany's answer to Macron be? Is it on the Eurozone? Is it on security and defense policy? Is it on migration? I mean, what can that Franco-German project be that breathes that new vigor into the EU?
Well, tricky question. So I give a typical political answer. No. Well, for me, as a green politician, it's kind of the Green New Deal. And you had this debate, I believe, back in the 30s, the New Deal, but also kind of when we had the whole crisis, a New Deal when we had the financial crisis. Meaning that we really have to invest into the future, into future projects. And this means they have to be ecological investment, but also social just investment in our society. And then, because you said like Euro crisis and these things, they are, in my point of view, all under this big story of a Green New Deal, meaning that you can do it only in a European Union, and there's Macron totally right. If we have a common currency, we need to have a common fiscal and economy policy. And if we are not ready to give up these competences, it will never work. And this is really a big failure from the past governments of saying we are so much hesitant from a German perspective of giving really competences in the fiscal regulation market. But it doesn't just help to like say, okay, we have to invest in it. If it's not ecological investment and a fair investment and a social just investment, we will continue to have this deep, deep split within society.
So I'm assuming from where you sit, if you're looking at the spectrum of leadership in the European Union, Macron would be at the bright end of the spectrum, and probably at the other end of the spectrum would be Viktor Orban. And we saw today that the European Parliament had a vote where a strong majority in the Parliament agreed that it was appropriate to begin rule of law procedures against Hungary. Now, most people think that that Article 7 process won't result actually in that suspension of voting on Hungary because there is not unanimity in the EU about how to manage this. I mean, you were saying earlier that for you, every day you want to fight for the rule of law, defend the rule of law. How does Germany, as a key member of the EU, try to manage this when certain member states you feel are abrogating the rule of law?
Well, I cannot give a German answer because this would be the government's, I don't know whose position, because I think Germany did something wrong in the past, especially, this government, because the Conservative Party, which is the party also of Angela Merkel, they were in the same political family, or they are still in the same political family as Viktor Orban. And I truly believe that this is one source for the problem, that if you kind of for a long time say, okay, we don't really look closely of what's going to happen within countries, within parties, and realize that politics is changing in an anti-democratic way, and you kind of ignore it because it's easier for you within your own political family, then we are having a problem, and sometimes it's too late. And maybe from outside, this was also a bit here in the US. I mean, also, I bet it also a lot of bottles of good wine that Mr. Trump will never win these elections, but just hoping that things will go right in the end is not enough in a democracy. And we in Germany, we always thought, because we learned a lot from our past, that we have kind of a safeguard network or firewall against anti-democratic movements. And we shouldn't trust so much on these kind of firewalls. We have to work on them. And so it's not just Viktor Orban in Europe. What's happening in Austria is worrying me actually a bit more than what's happening in Hungary, because everybody is at least talking about Hungary. But like in Europe in general, nobody is really talking about Austria. And I mean, there's like a real big threat to democracy as well, starting with that the party itself, from Mr. Kurz, entered the intelligence service of Austria and took all the secret documents from whomever, which is lying there, to their party house. I mean, this is a total breach of the division of power within a country, and kind of nothing has happened. So I'm happy that the European Parliament started Article 7 chapter right now. I would say it's way too late. They should have done that a couple of years ago, but the governments didn't dare because they were afraid, because it's a member of the Conservative Party. But it will be just the case if they also look at Austria, if they also look at Italy. I mean, we're having really hard times in Europe. But if it means anything to us that we are a union of values, we cannot ignore these tendencies which are upcoming right now. And I would say, because there's, again, not the single answer, the most important thing is that if we take now away the voting right, for example, another debate is of taking the money which goes to the countries. Yeah, we have to be careful that we don't hit the wrong people. For example, there's so much civil movement still going on in Hungary, also in Poland, for example. It's especially, very interesting fact, maybe we can come back to that later, it's especially women who are fighting for democratic rights, going on the streets, defending democracy, which have been never politicized before, but they are now there because they are saying, okay, when democracy is in danger, especially women's rights are also in danger, because in this societies with right-wing extremism, it's always a cut on women's rights as well, abortion rights, but also other questions of working rights and these kind of things. So if we cut on funding for European countries, we should give that directly to local and community areas. And this would be the same analysis for a transatlantic relation. Yeah, if we are having problems between the administration relations, then we should focus more on the relations between cities, between states and citizens, like in this wonderful GMF programs. And this is the same for the Eastern European countries, because the people, especially in Hungary, they really depend on the support of other European cities, because they go on the streets every day to defend democracy still in Hungary.
So I'm about to open it up to all of you, but before I do that, I have one last question for you, and it's about us Americans. We are sitting here in Washington. Certainly those of us who are Germany watchers in the room read with interest when your foreign minister, German foreign minister Maas, articulated his new U.S. strategy. And I'm curious what the perspective of the Greens is on the U.S. and is there a green U.S. strategy?
Yeah, there's also a green U.S. strategy, but in sometimes it's some things it's overlapping with the strategy of our foreign ministry, and other parts it's not so much overlapping. I mean, if you're referring to the article also, which he wrote, I think it's very important that the question of a strong Europe and like even stronger Europe in the field of foreign relation, European security is not a reaction to what has happened here in the US, but it has to be a reaction of the challenges Europe is facing worldwide. And those of you who know European politics a bit better, we have like a strong integration path in environmental questions, also in the question of the internal market. So this is like the strongest integration project. But in the field of foreign policy, also internal security policy within the European Union, many things are still regulated on the national level, which means that also, for example, for the fight of terrorism within Europe, there's not a European answer, there's a national answer of every European state. So I strongly believe that even if we would have had here another administration, Europe has to work within the next years more on the question of integration, on security issues, on foreign policy issues, speaking with one voice in this regard. Because Europe has to play a major role in a globalized world. And now if it comes on the same spot that the US currently is playing a way less role on the international level, and our guarantee as Europeans, it was always very easy for us of saying, okay, multilateral problems, okay, if we are not doing anything, then at least the US is taking care of it. And if we are not in the situation anymore, Europe has the question if they are ready to stand up. And I believe if we as Europeans are not ready to stand up to fight for multilateralism answers, to fight for peace in the world and also for transatlantic relation, we see other powers emerging. And if you look at China, for example, I would say China is kind of the only power in the world currently which seems to have some kind of strategy what they want to do with regard of the globalized world. I don't agree of what they are doing, but if I want to give another answer, and my green answer also transatlantic relations and to multilateralism, would be that this has to be an answer which, again, sees the boundaries of our economic growth, that there are environmental boundaries, sees a need for bridging the gap between the division between poor and rich in the world, and also sees the need that security is a global question and that we have to care for our neighbors, because otherwise we will have a huge problem. And this is what we as Europeans have to work on. And if we have again or still partners all over the Atlantic in this field, this would help a lot for world politics. And if not, then Europe really has to fill this gap.
Super. Well, thanks so much. And let me open it up to all of you. Yeah, all the way in the back.
I'm Basil Scarless. I've worked on German affairs and European affairs, and there is a view here in the United States, and I'd like your opinion if you have a similar view in Europe. A view among many social critics in the United States is that the professional elite of the United States, the upper 10% of income, they don't face the problems of immigrants or the workers in factories when there are trade dislocations and when there's high levels of immigration. They can live in wealthy suburbs. In wealthy suburbs in the United States, you know, schools are excellent. Many others lower down in the socioeconomic layers can't afford that. Do you have a similar perspective in Germany?
Yes, I would say not as much as here in the US. Like if you look at the education system, for example, because like we don't really have privatized schools, so we have like a broad field of public schools, so there are some differences. But in general, we face the similar situation that there's, especially in big cities, a gentrification, yeah, that people are really being pushed out of cities. And the strengths in the past, I would say, kind of in the European model was that neighborhoods were like totally mixed, like from social different income levels, that people's kids went to the same school, didn't matter what their parents' income was, that they played together in a football club. But because of gentrification in cities, like neighborhoods are totally homogeneous. So the kids go to the same school and they play in the same football club. And we have it in some areas, they play tennis, and in the others they play football. And this is already a question of social origin. So that's why I also mentioned before, the question of social equality is one of the crucial questions if we want to defend democracy within Europe, because social justice is one of the cornerstones. I know it's a bit different here, but it's one of the cornerstones of European democracy. And I'm always saying social justice is the glue which connects society. And we see that this is not like sticking so much anymore. And in the same regard, democracy is fraying apart. And these are the big challenges. So that's why also the question of taxation, the question of income, the question of retirement scheme has to be on the top agenda of our society. And the same with the question of if people are facing the results of migration. Yeah, even like in the school where my daughter's at school, because in my neighborhood, there are not so many refugee-based, meaning that in the class of my daughter, there's only one girl from Syria. And we realize already how difficult it is for the teacher if there's one girl who doesn't speak at all a single word of German. But there, like in another district, there are 5 kids who don't speak German at all. And obviously, the problem there is way bigger. And so my answer is not of saying, well, it would be better if there wouldn't be a single Syrian girl in the class, but that we need additional teachers in these classes where they face these challenges. And this is again coming back to politics. Politics is not about complaining about the situation, but the job of politicians is giving answer to the current situation there. And that's why we have to bring more teachers in school for teaching kids who don't know the language. And I see the danger, what you were mentioning, if I don't realize that there is a problem at all, because in my school class, there is not even a refugee kid, then obviously I'm not really facing the challenges others are facing in the neighborhood and the district, the corner around.
Here's to solving problems. That's a good one. Yes.
Michael Drinkwater with AICTS. So you mentioned that you would like to learn from Mr. Macron. As you know, Macron is currently trying to form a pan-European coalition that transcends traditional party lines for the next European election. Would the Greens be willing to join such a coalition?
Well, I advise the German government to learn from Macron, because many ideas from Macron were also the ideas we had already some time ago with regard to European integration. And it's also not by coincidence that we are having a Green Party in France, because in some fields I also totally disagree with Mr. Macron, especially on nuclear question, but also on some parts of migration question. Therefore, my answer to your question, if we join his coalition, no, because we are running as European Greens for the future parliament. We have our own parliamentary group. However, on the question of shaping future politics, I truly believe that it's very important that progressive actors and progressive political parties join forces on the crucial question, where is Europe as such as a project heading for? And we have to vote for a new head of commission after this European election, and we will definitely support a person who does progressive, pro-European politics for the next 5 years. And if there's an alliance between different political parties, we were very happy to support these. And I see us as a Green Party kind of as a bridge for some of the ideas from the Macron movement on European questions. And also, for example, Syriza in Greece, I also have with some topics my problems, but also with a European approach in this difficult crisis. And I think if progressive actors join forces, then in this kind of regard for the next Commission, it will be very helpful for Europe as such.
Martin Ganselmeier, German Public Radio, ARD. To whom here in the United States do you talk? Who's your natural allied party? Is it the Green Party in America, which is much, much smaller than the Green Party in Germany? Or because you're number 2 now in Bavaria, I mean, you're much bigger, and are you increasingly talking to the Democratic Party, the Sanders wing of the Democratic Party? Who are politicians you're talking to here?
Well, I meet many different players, but the reason for my visit was the climate conference in California, where I'm heading for tonight. And we had to rebook the flight because of the hurricane is coming up. I would say also the strength of this weather phenomenon is already a sign of the climate crisis. But anyhow, so due to this visit, I also went to New York and here to Washington. And my visits were focused on the question of where are progressive alliances over the ocean for strengthening democracy, strengthening the rule of law. Therefore, I met many civil society people here within the US, and especially in the field of democracy, indivisible, I always say it right, no, indivisible, yeah. And other players, but afterwards, after this meeting, I'm going up to the Hill as well, and I'm having talks there as well with people from the capital. So it's a big mixture of people, but with a focus on civil society.
Great. And I'm going to keep swinging around, but I also just want to encourage women in the room to ask questions too. But Ted, yeah.
Ted Reiner, Brookings Institution. As someone on the center-left who wishes we had a healthier center-right committed to liberal democracy in this country, I'm wondering how you view the health of the center-right in Germany. Do you fear the CDU will turn away from the center and become more nationalist or illiberal after Chancellor Merkel leaves power? And what makes the CDU and CSU potential governing coalition partners for the Greens?
I truly believe also, like from German history, that there's a big danger of a total split within society. I mean, history never repeats itself, but for me, it's always important to look back to understand if we have some like tipping points or alarm signals. And that's why also in the relation to what has happened in Chemnitz, it was very easy to say the government in Saxony has totally failed, and the prime minister of Saxony, he's from the Conservatives, and saying, okay, this is all your fault. I think, yes, in part, they have a high responsibility of what has happened there, especially with regard to the state institution, with regard of the police, and also with regard to the intelligence service. But it's too easy to say this is the only reason. And I find it more important in this kind of situation to bringing a strong alliance with all the democratic actors together on the streets, fighting for democracy, instead of saying, look at our party, we are the only true one party which is defending democracy. I think in this kind of situation, you really need an alliance between all democratic parties. However, I also had to realize, and this was really hard for me, that in those days when we had like big protests where high-ranking politicians went to Chemnitz to give a symbol that we are fighting these extreme radical and criminal structures there, some people or some parties were missing. And this was unfortunately from a higher level, not from the local level, but from the higher level, also the conservative and the liberal parties. And I had a deep disappointment actually in those days, because I find it very dramatic. And also what I've seen here in my talks, this deep division, I would say is an alarming signal of why societies have such difficulties of holding together the society as such, which is, if you ask people, what is important for your life? Well, important is that I give a good future for my children and that they live happily and we respect each other like we want to be respected ourselves. And working on these kind of values is important. And on the other hand, I have to realize that unfortunately, obviously, not every democratic party also in Germany currently is having the same understanding as I'm having. And therefore, also me as a Green Party leader, I debated in public and asked the conservative, you have to say now on which side you're on. Are you on the side of the democracy, or are you being silent? And silent is very dangerous in these kind of situation. And now your question with regard of the, we call it union, the conservative union. So it's CDU and CSU, and the CSU is in Bavaria. And they tend to be more conservative also with regard to the question of, if you put back the old coordination system on the right system. And our interior minister is from the CSU. And yes, I'm having big problems, especially with him and with their line currently, because they debated openly in May, what I mentioned before, if we should have border controls again in Germany with regard to migration politics. He didn't say for 3 days anything to Chemnitz. He was just silent. Then we had our intelligence service president who openly questioned whether what happened there on the streets, that people were chasing foreigners on the street, if this really happened or if maybe this didn't happen and what public broadcast media showed was not really true. This is similar to what happened here with fake news, actually a debate which we didn't have before from, I would say, democratic forces, but now the president of our intelligence service questioned this and like totally overstepping his competences, giving a big interview on this. So coming back to the question with the CSU and CDU, yeah, there's a strong split I see currently within their own party. The CSU is totally nervous because they have had the majority in Bavaria. They are losing it. Their strategy was, okay, they move extremely to the right, hoping that they will gain some voters back from the AfD. Totally wrong scenario. It totally benefited us because we were saying, okay, if you move to the right, then we are the defenders for civil rights, for democracy, for the rule of law, for the media, kind of conservative values, I would say, but which aren't defended anymore from the Conservative Party of Bavaria at the moment. So some of the voters who before voted for the CSU now openly said, we vote for the Greens because at the moment they are the only one who are saying they will defend our democracy and our rule of law. And this is very important, a pro-European approach. This is also very important for many, many voters, especially in Bavaria.
So I'm actually going to sneak in a follow-up, but then I'm going to come to you and then you, okay, just so the microphone can. Do you think that's why the Greens are doing so much better in Bavaria? I mean, is it because the CSU has moved to the right and you're the ones occupying that space? And then why is it you and not the SPD? Or, help us understand that.
Because, and I have to say again, unfortunately, also the SPD in this kind of discussion, the rising from the AfD made everybody very nervous in our democratic systems. And different parties have given different answers to this rise of the extreme right-wing populism movement. And what I said, unfortunately, I have to say, parts of the conservative try to copy rhetoric from the AfD. The SPD wasn't really sure what to do. And in some question for migration policy, they said, okay, we shouldn't focus so much anymore on human rights and on refugees' rights. We have to do a bit more law and order. And also the left, I found that also very important in this field, like the chair of the parliamentarian group from the left also had some of the rhetoric, even from the extreme right, with regard to migration. And we as the Green Party, liberals, same, they don't know where they are standing on this question. And we as Greens are kind of left as the only parliamentary group who is saying we have a clear stand also on human rights, that we have a universal declaration of human rights and you cannot relegate human rights. They are there for everybody, also for refugees. Yes, we need like a structure and an order in our refugee policies. And this was always in the past that voters and also political parties said, yeah, but you as Greens, yeah, you just say refugees are welcome, but then how we handle it. And I think this was also one of our mistakes in the past, that we didn't explain enough or didn't give the solutions, what I was talking about before, as a party by ourselves. So how do we actually manage migration policy and also a refugee policy if many, many people are coming, like in 2015. And the system wasn't really prepared for it. And just saying, okay, somehow it will happen, doesn't work. And we really worked on like clear legislation, how we can do registration at the European border, giving examples of how we can do it in a European-wide program, that we have like common registration centers at the European borders within Europe, that's very important for me, where you have like standards, human rights standards, how to treat refugees. It didn't work in the past. We have horrible situation in Greece on the islands that we say we care if people are coming over the Mediterranean Sea. And we had you probably read this, yeah, that they were saved by boats, civil boats, because there again it was like the problem that European governments didn't dare to set up a European-wide safeguard network, which is under European control to rescue people who are in need on the Mediterranean Sea. That's why actually civil society movement took over the job, because the European Union, and also with the lacking support of Germany, didn't set up a rescue team under a European flag. And also in this regard, because many governments, and unfortunately almost all the political parties in Germany, were too afraid of saying, I mean, it's a human right. If people are in need and danger to die in the ocean, you have to rescue them. And afterwards, you can have like asylum processes and seeing if they have can claim a right of asylum. But in the first place, you have to rescue people if they are in the danger of dying. And these kind of questions, we took a very clear stand on it. And again, unfortunately, many or all the other democratic parties didn't really know how to behave in this kind of situation.
Super. So I'm going to suggest we take the last two questions together, just because I'm mindful of the time as well. So one here and then one here on the end. Yeah.
My name is Sanjin Choi, Langham Partners. Thank you so much for your lucid and succinct remark. And as you talk about in Frank and German axis, and I would be interested in your views, and French and German senior economic advisors and call for perhaps overhaul of European Euro budget. As we celebrate or reflect upon 10th anniversary of financial crisis, what is your view? And second, you mentioned about the Cameroon lacks courage with regard to Brexit issues. I absolutely agree with you, but I have slightly different angle, because Cameroon lacks courage to rebuff right wing of Conservative Party, for example, 1922 committee. Thank you.
I can speak loud enough, I think. Oh, thank you. Oliver Moss from the Potomac Exchange. A question, you mentioned ecological challenges as being very important. I think another one is demographics. Germany has an aging population. It's the fourth oldest population in the world, I think Japan. That's obviously going to create a great deal of challenges on the economy, and there could be another split between old and young, and also on immigration, because you need more people. And I'm just wondering what your comments are in that regard.
Well, with the financial crisis, there are different answers to it, but the most important one was that we didn't have a clear regulation on the question of banks going bankrupt and putting up a safeguard system. And that's why European states saved banks, because otherwise there was a big danger that whole societies and retirement schemes being connected to the banks would totally collapse. And this left a feeling within European societies, especially in Southern Europe, where there was also the question of austerity policy, that the state is helping out banks, and otherwise they are totally cutting on social welfare systems. And therefore, we as a Green Party, with a few other parties, called for a new setup of regulating banks to never have this happening again, that the state has to rescue banks, and especially also in the end rescue money like Greece, that he put up a system that we don't need the firefighters anymore, but you have in the forefront like a safeguard net for this. But unfortunately, with regard to the current political situation, there's no majority in the Council, in the European Council, for this kind of regulation network, and that's why we are still campaigning for this. And you mentioned the Jamaica coalition talks. especially these kind of questions, they were highly controversial between us Greens, the Conservative, and especially our Liberal Party, the Freie Demokraten, who I would say, yeah, unfortunately followed really a totally right-wing approach of saying, no, we shouldn't connect all over Europe with regard of regulation for financial markets. And this is, in my point of view, one really of the very, very important things to do for the next European Parliament. Same thing with tax havens. The biggest problem in Europe with the question of public money is that we don't have a European-wide regulation on tax havens and they say black money in English, like where you can avoid taxation, because the European states do not work properly together, because the national states, everybody says we want to do it in our own national competence, but it doesn't work if markets are interconnected in an internal European market. Then you need also European-wide tax regulation. But this is again the question of giving up competences on the European level or keeping it to the national level. These are just two examples. There are a few more on the question of how to regulate the financial market. With regard to demographics, yeah, we do have a huge problem there, because currently we cannot finance any of our social security system, because it's always like a generational system of saying people who work now finance the retirement scheme, the healthcare scheme, every scheme we do have. And if we are getting older as a society and having less younger people, then we obviously do have a problem. The good thing is that our birth rate has grown a bit in Germany, and that's why also for me personally, it's very important also to speak about the topic of women being in politics, but not only politics, but also like in high-ranking position and having kids, because unfortunately from our tradition, why this is coming back to one point I was tackling before, saying the Nazis in the German times, it was about oppression of minority, of Jews, of everybody. But also we had a model of women in society women stay at home and they care for the kids. And this was also one part of like the right extreme model. And the new extreme right-wing model is coming down to the same system. So for me, like, women rights are really always a question kind of a seismograph for democratic status in society. And that's why, for example, when I was running for this post, I made very publicly that I'm having 2 little kids, and that everybody can be prepared that there will be days where I have to say, I'm sorry, today is the birthday of my child, and I don't stop being a mother just because I'm a party leader of the Greens now. It sounds very normal, but it's not really normal in German politics. And also, I mean, we had to wait till 2004 that we had the first female CEO of our DAX, highest 30 DAX enterprises within Germany. So one question to demographic change is also like strengthening women in work, in power, because there was a highly connection that women who were successful didn't have kids anymore because society was not really prepared for that. But on the other hand, yes, we do need immigration. And it's very sad and sounds very weird probably to your ears, like as an immigration country, that it took ages for German society to actually accept the single sentence, we are an immigration country. And it's still highly controversial, but now, for example, within the next weeks, we hope that we will pass in Parliament our first immigration law. We didn't have that, so there was no legal way of immigrant legally to Germany because we didn't have a law for this. There was some European regulation for high qualified people. And this is also one of the very important answers to the whole discussion about refugees, because the extreme right always used it, well, these are not true refugees because they are not fleeing war. They are just coming here to work, which most of them, they flew from Syria because there obviously is a war going on. But on the other hand, we didn't even have a possibility of people who said, we just want to work in Germany because we didn't have a good immigration law. And this is currently on the table. And maybe it's also a good line to end with a bit of hope that even so, some discussions are very tricky, even though in those days where we are having discussion about the rule of law, democracy again, there is also hope that rational decisions and solutions will succeed in the end. But I think the important thing for me is that we shouldn't take them for granted. We always have to fight for them every day. And democracy really needs us in Europe, in the US. And the best thing is if we work together on it. Thank you very much for the discussion.
Well, I was just going to say thank you very much from me. And I think whatever one's politics, we would all agree that you are an inspiring example of a woman who is in a key position of political leadership. And I want to thank you for the clarity of what you said, thoughtfulness, and also for giving us hope. So thank you so much.